Matt Putorti joins us now. Welcome, it's nice to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be back.
You're a political newcomer. This is your first run for office, so why don't you tell us about yourself, why you've decided to run for Congress, and what voters should know about you.
So I grew up in a small town in northern Washington County called Whitehall. My family's been there for generations. My great-grandmother opened a little grocery store in Whitehall in 1927. And my parents still operate that grocery store almost a century later. So I grew up in a very small town in a place, like so many communities across the district, New York 21, where people look out for each other and care for each other. And service and being involved in the community was a big part of our lives. For whatever reason, I decided not to go the family grocery store route. I have always wanted to be a lawyer, and so pursued that. In between college and law school, though, I took some time to do some service work. I spent 1 year in Sudan doing some service work during the Darfur crisis. And then I came back to the US and I did a year of service with AmeriCorps, mostly focused in Louisiana and Mississippi after Hurricane Katrina. Went to law school, practiced law for about 10 years, primarily representing policyholders suing their insurance companies, and doing a lot of pro bono work around LGBTQ rights, around immigration, and around reducing gun violence in America. I worked a lot with Gabby Gifford's organization, the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, and had a great career, but I've always been interested in public service and politics. So I was always trying to figure out in my mind, when is the time to make that change, make that leap? As I've watched Elise Stefanik, I would say, radicalize, I realized I needed to do something. And then January 6th happened, and that further solidified this desire to, now is the time to take action. I'm concerned about the representation that this district, my home, is not getting. So I thought there's no other option. This is the time to do it, and jumped in the race over a year ago.
Do you think she's become too partisan?
I think she's become too extreme. Her loyalty to Donald Trump has pushed her to this very far extreme faction of the Republican Party, one that isn't looking out for people. And that is, it's dangerous for the country, it's dangerous for the future of our democracy, it is a continuing threat, but it is also really bad for the district. I view her career as one that has only been in service of herself. And as a result of that, this district is not getting the representation that it needs, because she's not looking out for the people here, she's only looking out for herself. If she were looking out for the people here, she would have voted in favor of the infrastructure bill. If she were looking out for the people here, she would have voted in favor of capping the cost of insulin. If she were looking out for the people here, she would have voted in favor of codifying Roe and a federal assault weapons ban. These are the things that this district wants and needs a representative to advocate for the people here, not for just looking out for her own political career.
She is now the third highest ranking Republican in the US House. She and her supporters say that would carry a lot of clout for the North Country and for the people that she represents. She is a formidable opponent, so how do you counter that? Why do you take her on?
The North Country hasn't benefited from her role as the number 3 in the House Republican Conference. In fact, I think I would say that we're almost embarrassed by her performance because of the things that she's voted against and the things that she's done. So we have to be very direct in taking her on, and very responsive to the needs of the people here. I think if we're talking about strategy and how we defeat her, there's 2 goals in this election. It is about defeating an extreme Republican who is not looking out for this district. That is one goal. And the other goal is to put in place somebody who can be an advocate for this district. So how do you achieve both of those ends, and who's the right person to do that? To defeat Elise, we have to be honest about who she is. We have to take her on. I think people have seen that our campaign and I have taken her on. I'm not afraid to do so. If you've seen our ad on TV, we're very direct about what she's doing and how that's impacting this district. And then you solve for the other piece about having somebody who will represent this district by having somebody who didn't just move here just to run for office. I am somebody who is deeply rooted here and want what is best for the people here.
The makeup of the 21st Congressional District has changed pretty dramatically this summer with redistricting. The newly redrawn district is now made up of 15 counties. Montgomery, Schoharie, Fulton to the south. Saratoga was in, then cut out. Watertown is no longer part of the 21st, but all of Fort Drum was put back in. Bottom line, though, is once you're past the Democratic primary, this is still a district that has more Republicans. The Republicans have a distinct advantage in voter enrollment. How do you counter that? Do you have enough support? Are you confident that you'll be able to get enough of both Democrats and independents to counter the advantage Republicans have?
Sure. So I like to make sure that we talk about this district in a way that people understand how it's made up. So there is no one group that has more than 50% of the registration. Republicans are about 40%, give or take a little bit, and then the remaining 60% is almost equally split between Democrats and unaffiliated voters. So you do need to create a coalition to be able to be successful here. One, we need to get Democrats out to vote. And I think because of what's happened in this country, particularly in the last couple of months with Buffalo and Uvalde and the overturn of Roe, I have seen this new energy among Democrats to get involved in this race because our rights are at stake, our country, our democracy is at stake, and so people are more energized. And I think on the unaffiliated side, and even some Republicans as well, they see Elise as too extreme to represent them. And we see that coalitions like this can be successful. If we look just what happened or was it just last week in Kansas, when there was a referendum on abortion rights in that state. It took a coalition, but an overwhelming majority of people across party lines wanted to preserve this right. And so I think we'll see the same thing happen in a district like this.
You just mentioned a couple of the hot issues right now. What are priorities for you? What are you going to focus on?
There's so many things to focus on, but the good thing is we have the talent and the resources to be able to deal with all of these things at once. So the first, and I think the most important thing, is what I call the economic bucket of issues. We're dealing with very high inflation, rising prices, and so we need to do what we can to lower costs for food and for healthcare and for child care. Those for housing, that's another big issue in this district that a lot of people talk to me about. There are ways that we can do that. If this latest bill that passed the Senate, the Inflation Reduction Act, if that passes, that will allow Medicare to negotiate prescription drug prices and help lower the costs of prescription drug prices, which is something we've been trying to do for years. So really monumental changes, but there's still more work that we need to do to help working families be able to provide the very basic things that families need. The next bucket, I would say, is all of protecting our rights. We've seen what happened when the Supreme Court decided this Dobbs decision that overturned Roe and took away 50 years of a right to an abortion for women across this country. And Justice Thomas's concurring opinion indicated that the court and perhaps the Republican Party is not stopping there. They want to come for contraception. They want to come for same-sex marriage. So we really have to make sure that we are protecting these fundamental rights that are intrinsic to our country, to the people who live here. They need to know that we're doing everything we can to protect these rights. And I would be remiss if I didn't stop and say, Elise Stefanik voted against codifying Roe. Elise Stefanik voted against federal access to contraception. So these are real issues that are affecting people's lives. I think keeping our community safe is very, very important. So making sure that our police have the funding that they need to keep our community safe, but also making sure that we are doing what we can to reduce gun violence in America. And that's why I am so forcefully speaking out. I'm the only person in this race who is forcefully speaking out and in favor of a federal assault weapons ban. I support the Second Amendment and people's rights to own guns, but I have talked to people across the political spectrum, people who own guns, people who don't own guns. Virtually no one with whom I have spoken has said there is any reason for a civilian to own an assault weapon. It is a weapon of war used to kill a lot of people. That is its function. We can get rid of assault weapons and still protect the rights of gun owners and the Second Amendment and do both of those things at the same time. And that's what we need to be honest about. We need to have the courage to talk about these things and not make political calculations about what we should or shouldn't say.
The bill that the House and the Senate passed this summer as far as gun safety, did it go far enough or would you go further?
I'm in favor of all of these common sense measures that I think are broadly popular across the country and in this district. Things like universal background checks, red flag laws, closing the gun show loophole, and a federal assault weapons ban. this suite of measures will, we know, keep our community safe while still allowing gun owners to exercise their rights. These are the things that we need to be doing.
Inflation, for many people, is the top issue. Seeing the 40-year high, and the jump, the rise in prices in the grocery store, at the gas pump. Does the Inflation Reduction Bill that the House will get later in the week do enough, or does more need to be done beyond that?
It's going to make great progress, and in addition to helping to reduce inflation, I would also want to remind people that it's one of the largest investments in combating climate change in this country's history. These are monumental pieces of legislation, but there certainly is more that needs to be done to lower the costs. The reality is there are some things that we could do to help people immediately, and there are some things that we need to start working on now to help lower costs in the long term and making sure that those costs remain low. So something like, if I think about child care costs, that is a huge cost for families. They're spending sometimes as much or more than their mortgage just to have their children looked after, which is a very important thing, but that's a lot of money. And so there were proposals earlier this year in the Build Back Better bill to cap the cost of childcare expenses. I think things like that still need to be on the table because we still have more work to do.
A lot of Democrats, progressives, really want to move toward universal health care, Medicare for all. Do you?
I think the Affordable Care Act was a great first step in expanding access to health care in this country. There are reforms that could be made to it to lower the costs that families are paying, and I would support those. Some of those, there are some premium reduction provisions in the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. And I think adding a public option to Medicare is the next important step in further expanding access to health care in this country.
Let's talk about your opponent in the Democratic primary. What separates you from Mr. Castelli?
There's a few differences. I'm the only candidate in this race, including if we compare to Elise Stefanik, who grew up in this district, who went to public school in this district, whose family has been here for generations, who voted in the district prior to running for office. I think that really matters to have a representative from our community be the representative in Congress. I know this district. I care very deeply about this district.
Matt Putorti, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to chatting more.